We are also going to have our final, but also a very important panel discussion of the day on the topic of promoting equity in esports without creating barriers. We would like to invite Mr. Jim Huntley to moderate this session. Joining us virtually are Professor John Festinger, QC, Adjunct Professor, Peter A. Allard School of Law, the University of British Columbia. Ms. Nessa Harrison, student, VP External Relations of UBC Esports Association, the University of British Columbia. Ms. Cathy Ge, student, Director of UCLA Esports, University of California, Los Angeles. Ms. Ariana Yao, student, Vice President of the NTU Esports Society, Nanyang Technological University. Mr. Jacko, Esports Coach, University of Southern California. Last but not least, Mr. Liam Slack, Esports Manager, BANDAI NAMCO Entertainment America, Inc. We will have a Q&A session for the session. You may simply scan the QR code and type in your questions during the discussion. Mr. Huntley, please.
Welcome, everybody. Hello, APRU. I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, California. My name is Jim Huntley. I'm a professor in the University of Southern California's USC Games program, jointly shared between the School of Cinematic Arts and Viterbi School of Engineering. We've been #1 in game design for, I think, 11 of the last 12 years of the Princeton Review ranking. So I'm welcoming you here, and I'm even though it's late in the day here, I'm super excited to talk about this topic, promoting equity in esports without creating barriers. In the last 5 years or so, there have been massive political shifts in every single country that we live in, and how organizations large and small are prioritizing equity, diversion, and inclusion in their organization's ecosystem. Esports, as a new segment with a lot of opportunity for engagement and a lot of growth potential, has also inherited some, frankly, systemic gaming industry issues that existed in its DNA for a while now, which is the lack of representation from certain minority groups as well as from women in the workplace. That's especially a problem or an issue when it comes to esports in front of the camera. I think we've talked about that, and we touched on some of those points in the prior panel, where even in a totally different topic, diversity and inclusion and equity comes up as an issue that is a concern to us all. When these issues come up and there's a blow up in the culture and the community, and people start really, unfortunately, actually attacking some of the players or people that publicize themselves, the conversations flare up and then they die down. And there hasn't been a lot of long-term systemic change, aggressively speaking, in terms of fixing it. And so what we're going to talk about today, because we at USC Games actually think the lack of diversity and inclusion is probably the biggest long-term risk for esports as a segment and as a category. What we're going to talk about today are strategies and policies that esports experts in the ecosystem need to consider to create more inclusive and diverse cultures for gamers worldwide. And in terms of housekeeping, like the announcer said, we encourage participants to raise questions via the Q&A function during presentations. If you are using social media, I'm a marketing person, so I love giving this line. If you're using social media and want to share more information about this panel, please tag @APRU1997 and hashtag APRU on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So the first section of our panel, each speaker is going to have around 5 or 6 minutes to give initial remarks, as well as a couple of brief sentences about their bio. And then after all the presentations are done, I have a question for each of them, and then we'll do some audience Q&A. So with that, since all the introductions were done earlier, I'm going to turn it over to John Festinger, a professor at the Peter Allard School of Law at the University of British Columbia. John, take it away.
Thanks very much, Jim. I have just optimistically set my timer running. As a professor, you understand we never actually stay to the time we're allotted, but we pretend that we're trying to.
Exactly.
I've been a media and communications lawyer my entire career, which started in 1981. So yes, I'm old. I've essentially acted for Canadian broadcasters for the first 15, 20 years of my career. So those questions of equity and portrayal of gender, portrayal of race, actually go all the way back into broadcasting. So, point number one is these aren't new issues. I've been a UBC law professor and also have taught at other law schools since 1993. My courses have included intellectual property law, communications law, and video game law, which I taught my first course in that at Allard in 2005, rather. First course, I think, in the world on video game law. I've also taught corporate law, still teach corporate law a lot, and entertainment law. And the issues of equity and access and racism also show up in the corporate field. I've also, between 2005 and 2010, I was executive vice president of the Vancouver Canucks of the National Hockey League. And again, in professional sports, these same issues have been there. So when we talk about them in terms of video games and esports, I think there's sometimes a little bit of dumping on these particular areas without understanding that the antecedent areas, that the areas that came first, all of that, the one advantage of being old is I remember sexism in television and in film and in radio, and I was on the front lines of seeing complaints about racism and sexism. So, number one issue is not the panic. Number two, to me, is, and you sort of alluded to it, but Jim, governance is the key issue.
Yeah.
So how do we govern ourselves in an esports sense? And how do we take the opportunities that university esports demand demand good governance? Because it really does. If we're going to mess up our students, then we are way on the wrong track. And I think university esports can actually serve, if done properly, as a model for what all of esports needs to do. Because esports is pretty fragmented right now. It's kind of a mess governance-wise, and doesn't really know, is it a sport? Is it a game?
Is it academic?
Is it fact? Is it fiction? So number one is governance, and I want to put governance in the realm of an opportunity where, if we work on equality and respect being built into the system, then we will get equity. And we have to remember that, one of the good things about esports is that men and women and have equal talent when it comes to esport from every indication, and race isn't an issue either. Also, university esports have a good opportunity that to distance itself from gambling. And sometimes I feel uncomfortable when I see how other esports get a little bit too close. So governance is number one. Yeah. But I also want to talk about what esports can do in terms of furthering the role of universities. So obviously what universities do is education, but let's not forget, my daughter just came back from her first semester at McGill University in Montreal. I'm in Vancouver. She just came back today. But why did she go so far away? Student socialization, relationships, and all of that. There is a digital future to education, even post-COVID. And one thing that esports does, and in fact, video games do very well, is create horizontal connections. And horizontal connections is actually what we're really missing, in my view, in this COVID education environment where many of us are teaching remotely. We're not able to get the connection between students. We're great on the vertical between professors and students. We need more abilities to get students to band together. And esports, in fact, does that. And that horizontal is critical to student health, to student mental health. And I'd suggest that equality and equity end up being a natural outgrowth of a healthy environment. 6 minutes and 9 seconds. Over to you.
No, very, very solid points. That's something that the faculty at USC and myself have talked about a lot. How do we make sure that we don't just have these screens for one-to-many conversations, but also have them connect the students with each other and build the type of culture, at least as close as we can get in this, with these challenges that they would have when they were actually on campus. So very good points. I'm going to turn away from John and introduce Nessa Harrison. Sorry, she's a student and head of VP External Relations for the UBC Esports Association at UBC.
Hello, as Jim said, my name is Nessa Harrison and I am the Vice President of External Relationships for the University of British Columbia Esports Association, located in Vancouver, Canada. I'm currently a fourth-year Asian Cultural Studies student here at UBC, same as John, and I'll be speaking about my experiences in esports from the student's perspective, as someone who's also on the executive board of our school's Esports Association. I'm very lucky to come from a club that has evolved to have a zero tolerance rule for discrimination, racism, and sexism. It's extremely welcoming. Our leadership is amazing, supportive, and always tries to promote equity in esports in any way possible, whether it be holding women's gaming nights or trying to bringing out girls in our community or having a diverse board. Because of that, I consider myself extremely sheltered because it wasn't until I decided to go out and pursue an esports career outside of the club that I realized how prevalent sexism and racism still are in the esports industry. And despite not having much female representation in esports jobs near me, I knew that it was something that I wanted to pursue. So I still am trying to do my best to do that. When I first went out into the big world of esports, one of my first jobs was actually to analyze social media comments and create an advertisement plan for an esports media company. As I presented the marketing plan to my manager, he blatantly told me that my opinions didn't matter because I was only part of the female 3% viewership as opposed to his 97% male viewership. He said, as part of the majority of our viewership, I think that our viewership would love an ad where you get into a cosplay of one of the game characters, and actually showed me an image of one of the characters, which was an underage Korean girl wearing a bodysuit, which isn't what I was hired for. And when I expressed this to the higher ups, they just wrote it off as a joke. They said, oh, he's just kidding, Nessa. Like, why are you so upset about it? But they never brought it up again. That's just one example of like many times that I've experienced like this kind of just sexism in esports, and I think that it is something that women shouldn't have to deal with. Even recently, within my few months of being VP External, I learned to create a pitch deck for my club that I was really proud of. But even in the middle of our external partnership calls, the people that I talk to will say things like, hey, kind of random, but I saw your partnership deck and I saw the headshot that you have in it. I just have to know, where are you from? You just look so exotic. And I have to say like, oh, I'm from Canada. And it's like, no, like, what's your real background, your ethnicity? And it's like, oh, I'm half Canadian, half Filipino. And then he goes, oh, that's so cool. I have a friend from the Philippines. And you're probably wondering, why am I sharing this with you? Well, it's just that like, it's not something that my non-minority friends ever have to deal with. And I think that it completely derails any sort of partnership conversation. It's just such a distraction that like what I look like has just have such an impact on like any sort of conversation that I have in the esports industry. In both cases, my abilities and anything that I was pitching mattered less to the person that I was speaking to than something entirely out of my control, which is my appearance. Because of this, there have actually been many times that I've considered leaving esports. And I know that many other women and minorities actually have left as a result of the lack of inclusion for them. Just as John was saying, I think that like it shouldn't be a thing. I don't know where I'm going with that, but yeah. It's only thanks to my friends in esports and the club that I'm in that I've been able to stay. And I think that with these examples, I'd like to speak about what we as students and club leadership can do to better promote equity in esports, what our administration can do to help us achieve that, and what the brands that we work with can do to promote a more inclusive image for their brand. For students, I have to say the obvious: don't be a bystander when your friends make the casual sexist or racist joke, because that could be the difference between a woman or minority entering the esports industry or leaving. For club leadership, I'm sure that you understand that inclusivity starts at home. For many students, your esports club will be their home on campus for the next 4 to 6 years of their lives. I definitely know that it was for me, and I definitely wouldn't have been able to continue pursuing my role in the club if I didn't know that there were people who respected me regardless of my gender or my ethnicity. As leaders in collegiate esports, it's definitely essential to promote inclusivity on campus, and I'm actually really proud of my club for doing so. For administration, I think that things as simple as spreading the word about your clubs on campus as being welcoming to all would help immensely. Hosting club days and career workshops are other examples I can think of. I know that UBC did that earlier this year, pre-COVID. That's crazy to think about. That was just earlier this year. They hosted a career workshop, and it really showed that there are women in esports and women in gaming, and there is representation of their respective identities in esports. I guess lastly, for the big brands, from my personal experiences that I mentioned earlier, I'd say that treating the minorities within your companies with respect, regardless of what they look like, would be amazing. And for everyone, just use the golden rule. Treat others the way that you want to be treated. I think that goes without saying, but I guess that it's easy to forget when you're always behind the screen in gaming. So I guess that's like my last point. Yeah, I guess I'll turn it back over to Jim.
Yeah, that was great. Thankfully, we have our mics muted because when Nessa was relaying some of her experiences, you would have heard me just go, oh, God. Because these things happen, and Lord knows we've had female players and female staff members also relay experiences like that at USC. But when you hear them, every single story is just a groan because it just shows how far we still have to go. But thank you so much for those insights. Nessa, I'm going to turn it over to Cathy, who's going to give a presentation. She's a student and the director of UCLA Esports at the University of California, Los Angeles, who, by the way, are our crosstown rivals, the USC Trojans. So, but do a great job.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you everyone, all the panelists, guests, and APRU. I'm incredibly passionate about what we're talking about today, and it's an honor to be able to share that with you all. Personally, I've been working esports since around 2016 when I started running tournaments online in high school for various leagues. Since then, I've gone on to produce collegiate and professional tournaments for Blizzard, as well as helping events and marketing in the Overwatch League for the LA Valiant, as well as director of UCLA Esports. If you were to ask me what my biggest challenges were in esports, I would say that it was just like trying to find a path. And I'm extremely lucky for that. I'm extremely lucky that the staff at UCLA Esports welcomed me and let me learn and grow with them. And I'm lucky that my coworkers I've worked with throughout the years have all been very patient with me and taught me how to work as a group. But not everyone has that experience, and as organizations, it's our responsibility to make sure that people stop having those experiences. So all esports organizations need to do a better job of elevating women and other minorities. When students dedicate their free time for their passions, um, it's a pursuit of their goals, and they deserve to be protected by the administration. For me, the two essential ways to do this is through explicit support and established channels for crisis management. So explicit support is what I call when organizations make explicit their support of minorities. It's not enough to just assume that your students know that you want them there. So this can range from recruiting directly to those minorities to endorsing advocating groups within the organization. For example, we have UC Berkeley's Women in Gaming Club that offshoots from the main esports org and encompasses a lot of great things. Another great idea is running workshops that directly address common discriminatory issues in esports, such as implicit association. As you can kind of tell, the common theme between all these measures is just a direct addressment and support of the marginalized groups. Some student org leaders or like school administrations may say that like, oh, we have a great culture, or like all our members just know that they belong. And sure, that might work for a group of like 20, 50, 60, but as the years go by and you grow, and we all know that esports is something that's going to only exponentially grow. The only way to ensure that you grow in the right directions throughout the years is through structural support of your marginalized groups. So moving on to like establishing channels for crisis management, this means creating a structured plan for like how you deal with the issues that students bring to you. It's important to remember that like as students, it's not easy to report things. You know, it's not easy to put yourself out there because by doing that, you are kind of putting yourself in the line of fire. I've heard of many cases where administrations turned on the victim, you know, um, bounce them from leader to leader, trying to kind of, there's like no clear path for what that victim should do. So it's vital to have clear steps to follow no matter the case. Um, for example, we, like for UCLA Sports as an org, we have clear steps that are written down that we need to do if someone comes to us and says, this happened. Besides that, we have anonymous report forms because we believe it's important that students feel safe in reporting their issues. So I say these are like kind of the two pillars of creating a structure that all students can kind of feel safe and accepted in. Thank you, Jim.
Absolutely. No, a lot of the issues that Cathy brought up are ones that we've had to struggle with in our school, definitely. And some of the implementation, some of the projects that they've implemented, I was jotting down like, oh, we need to follow up on that. So kudos to your program for being far ahead in the space and helping us all move forward and evolve. So I'm going to go from Cathy to Ariana Yo. She is the student vice president of the NTU Esports Society at Nanyang Technological University.
Hi, as Jim said, I am Ariana Yu from Nanyang Technological University. What I'm about to say would be from the perspective of a female gamer in Singapore and the trials people like us will have to face in order to emerge in the esports scene and why the female representation here is very, very small. First off, I'd like to say that the esports scene in Singapore is extremely small as it's still an emerging scene. Uh, Esports as a whole is still frowned upon in Singapore as our country emphasizes academics. They usually equate academic success as overall success in life. Like what Sean said in the previous panel, gaming is usually frowned upon as it's seen as detrimental to your grades, which is what we base our success on in this country. Singapore as a conservative society also strongly discourage just unconventional careers that don't offer financial stability. So from young, we are told that esports is just a waste of time and we should go and pursue a more viable career. As you can see, it's a extremely harsh environment for anyone to begin thinking about cultivating an esports career. And if you want to succeed, you most likely will have to leave the country, which is not something that many people want to do because all their friends and family are all in Singapore and we're quite a sheltered country, so like to leave that all behind to pursue a career, not many people would be interested in that. For example, if you were to ask a gamer in Singapore, like, oh, who is a professional esports player that you know that actually came from Singapore, most of them will only be able to tell you about Ice Ice Ice, a Dota 2 Singaporean player. He only managed to succeed when he left Singapore to train with overseas teams. And the culture here, because it's so academics based, from young we are discouraged from playing games. For example, when I was a teenager, I only got like 1 hour of playtime a week because my parents thought that I had to focus on my studies and that gaming would just make me less successful in the future. And like
Sorry,
some of my,
that's it. Did you say an hour a week?
yes,
Okay.
every Tuesday night, yes. And then some of my peers, they would even have their gaming privileges revoked if they didn't do well for their exams. And when I entered junior college, I found out that I wanted to find people to play games with, but then all of them would tell me, "Oh, in junior college we're all gonna quit gaming. We're gonna focus on our studies." So people I used to play with just completely didn't play for 2 entire years because they wanted to do well for their A levels. And yeah, so this just makes us very unlikely to go into esports as a career. And we have a lot of culturally based problems that make females feel unwelcome in the society. For example, there's the perception of female gamers being worse at the game than men, which is a very unfair and baseless assumption. As I feel that many people used to support this point would be how female gamers not there are very few or even none that are in like major competitions like the international at Dota or CS:GO majors. But I feel that this usually arises from a lack of financial support for the female esports scene. For example, the top 100 male esports highest earning esports players have they range from like 1 million to like 4 million, but the highest female got like 300,000 globally. So this lack of financial support would discourage females from even thinking of giving up their academics or devoting their time to playing games, as the career is not viable. You can't finance yourself and your expenses. So because of this, males that want to go into the esports industry, they are able to devote their time and everything because there's potential for higher earnings. But females usually will hold like a side job or full-time job. For example, last time when I was thinking of going wanting to pursue a career in CSGO, I went to check out a female team in Singapore called Asterisk, and then I found out that the team consists of 5 girls who all held full-time jobs and only played CSGO as like a side gig because the competitions didn't give them enough money to is merely just petty cash. So I realized that it's not viable for us. Uh, Also, I feel that the perception of female gamers being bad stems from young because in our society, uh, games are seen as more of a male centric activity. So there's a lack of exposure since young. I only got into gaming because my brother uh, introduced games to me when I was very young. But when I was in an all girls secondary school, all of my peers they didn't even consider gaming as a hobby. When I said that I played games, they're all like, "Huh? I've never played a computer game before." They didn't even have devices that could handle such games. Yeah, and so in university when we play like games on the Nintendo Switch, it feels like the guys are better. But I feel this is because this is the first time that girls are starting to play games. When guys in their teenage years they're hanging around playing going to LAN centers playing games together. So the differences between female and male gamers are mostly socially based, I feel. And then the lack of female representation is also, I think, very crucial in discouraging females from taking part in competitions. Like all of the female teams right now, a lot of my friends think of them as gimmicks, and then there's no support for these teams because they go into professional competitions and then they lose to boys, and then male gamers like to make fun of that. And our highest earning female esports player is Scarlett, who plays StarCraft 2, because of the fact that she's transgender, which by right shouldn't affect anything. A lot of men like to say that, oh, she's not a real girl, so like your best player is also a man, which further drives home the point that females are bad at games, which I find is very this mindset will deter females from even trying because they don't want to be made fun of. And lastly, the attitude towards female gamers in the society, in the community, is not so welcoming. For example, when I play competitive games, we all know that we have to use our mics because communication is key for teamwork. But sometimes I feel scared because I get various reactions. Sometimes there were people who would harass me for the rest of the game, asking me if I'm a girl, adding me, and then there are some people who would just start throwing the game by following me around, and then because of that we lose, and then I feel very unwelcome, and sometimes it makes me frustrated and think of quitting the game entirely. And I think this mindset surrounding how rare female gamers are or people not taking them seriously, I think it has to change for us to even consider it as a career. Thank you, Jim.
Those are great points. Yeah, I also have heard from the female students that are part of the esports organization that I'm the faculty advisor for, that they just mute their mics because it's just so distracting when guy players that they're playing cooperatively with or competitively against hear their voice and suddenly start spending the rest of the game match making them uncomfortable by flirting with them. So it's disheartening to hear. And you're right, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we don't deal with it when boys and girls are young, it's going to just keep propagating itself as they get older and older and older and more involved in the gaming and esports ecosystem. So with that, I'm going to transition from Ariana to a person I barely know. No, Coach Joe Jacko also works with me at the University of Southern California. He is our varsity and junior varsity coach for League of Legends, as well as supports the program for a new initiative that we just tried out this last year called the PAC-U, which is a group of most of the Pac-12 schools banding together to play regular esports matches all fall. So Joe wears many hats, but he's a League of Legends master. I'm going to turn it over to him.
Yeah, hi, Jim. I'm Joe Jacko. As Jim mentioned, I'm the esports head coach at the University of Southern California, as well as the head coach at Westridge School for Girls. So previously, I spent 2 years playing at the collegiate level, and I won over $20,000 in collegiate esports scholarships with my team at Virginia Tech. When I realized I wanted to delve deeper into a career following collegiate play, I took on sort of an academic dive into the issues surrounding the space and actually tailored my education towards the pursuit of a better and more inclusive environment around the cultural issues that surround the scene. So I graduated with a degree in communication studies, where I focused heavily on gender, communication, and esports. I studied the work of women within the space of gender and communication and looked to apply their work to the budding field of esports. Deborah Tannen is one example out of the University of Georgetown. She did a lot of research within the space and communication, and I believe that the application of her work applies directly to esports. One anecdotal example that I can give might be, imagine a group of male-identifying students sit around and playing a game of baseball. One might say, I can hit the ball this high, indicating a certain height. One might say, I hit the ball this high, indicating a higher height. And the next might say, I hit the ball to the sky. It's a very competitive and one-up way of communicating with each other. And this lends itself to male communication or male identifying students in the way in which they communicate. Now, a different anecdotal example might be female identifying students within the same class that she examined, might be my parents' already contacts versus my parents' already contacts too. And so that sentiment actually copies not only the syntax of the statement, but also the sentiment, and encapsulates a more cooperative atmosphere and better addresses the cooperativeness of the space. So these examples generally display how gender identity influences the way in which we communicate and is the basis for how I believe we should approach tackling esports as it applies to gender. So I think that the first step we have to take is esports at a young age. As a lot of the previous panelists have mentioned, we have to create a space for student players to participate at a very young age so that they can normalize the synthesis of communication across gender. And we have to expose them to the styles that transcend gender in order to reduce the stigma and toxicity that these other panelists have experienced. When it comes to where I think we should implement this, I believe that, in my work with Westridge, it starts at the high school level. Student players should be exposed to the field early and often via a high school platform. The one that we work with in the US and broadly is PlayBS. We sort of allow students to get this taste of esports, not only from a gameplay perspective, but explore other job opportunities within the field. These students should get experience behind the scenes, and they should experiment with learning how to stream, as well as create content. I think that it goes a long way for how students can get involved professionally within the space while not necessarily pursuing just gameplay only. I think that where the workforce needs to come in, and my panelists again have previously touched on this, but that's diversifying the workforce. When we can start to systematically address the problems at the high school level and then bring them to the collegiate space, we should start to see a diversification of the workforce that lends itself to women and minorities. And I believe that if what the experience that I've had at Westridge is that when my student players see industry professionals that they can identify with, it's much more easy for them to say, if they can do it, I can do it too. And so that's my experience. That lends me to my experience at Westridge. the group that I work with at Westridge is extremely welcoming and inclusive. Whenever a new student joins, the greatest measure of success for me is that the student players actually welcome them with open arms and introduce them to how the club was before the pandemic. Very often they share their experiences when we were in person, and I think that that goes a long way to when we will again be in person and get to communicate once again. By instructing the extracurricular is sort of an academic way, as we do at USC, I think that I present material that allows for the student players to take notes similar to any classes they've been in before. And so while these student players at Westridge are new to the space and haven't necessarily played games all their life, they take it much more readily to it because, hey, this is just an extension of what I was doing a couple hours ago within class. So that goes a very long way as well. At USC, I think that my, academic way of instructing the game lends itself to a higher level of play in terms of meta and performance. And so while these applications work very well for the student players who are extremely new to the game, when we apply it at the USC or at the collegiate level, we actually get to see the exploration of a higher level of play where its players communicate in terms of both male forms of communication competitively, or male identifying forms of communication competitively, as well as female identifying forms of communication from a cooperative standpoint. And I think that the blend of those two styles is what makes our program unique and allows us to be a performing, cultural phenomenon within the realm of esports. And I implore every other, university to kind of take note from that and try to expand the way in which they communicate amongst themselves and take that further. Thank you.
That was great. Folks, you see why we have Joe as a coach. He is outstanding. His academic focus is exactly what we were looking for in a head coach for League of Legends, because the issues that he brought up in his brief talk today are the ones that we wrestle with and keep trying to push a boulder up a hill in terms of addressing for before he arrived, and we'll be doing it for years to come. But they're top of mind for us. It's not just about winning and doing awesome in games. It's also about really focusing and having an intent to build something that's got a healthy ecosystem and can thrive and be a welcoming, inviting organization for anyone to join. So with that, I will turn it over to Liam Slack. He is the esports manager for Bandai Namco Entertainment America Incorporated, which also is the licensee of my favorite video game series of all time, Naruto. So take as long as you like, Liam, please.
Thanks, Jim. And thank you to APRU for putting this together. It's great to have a platform to talk about equity in esports and bring up these kinds of important conversations. I'm, as you mentioned, from Bandai Namco Entertainment America. I work on the Tekken World Tour, Soul Calibur World Tour, Dragon Ball FighterZ World Tour. And of course, when it comes to equity in fighting games, we have a really, really diverse characteristic for a lot of our professional players. The highest calibers of play are really focused for us from the ground up in making sure that there's a large open space in which people can join and compete from anywhere in the world, and that regardless of who you are, where you are, and your gender, your ethnicity, anything like that, you have the ability to play in events frequently and climb the ranks to the top of the world. That's kind of a foundational basis that we approach our titles with and our competitive events with, is making sure that we build our circuitry in a way that is open, not just to areas with which we're familiar, but in a way where anyone can get involved from wherever they are. And I think approaching like from a foundational basis with that kind of direction. A good example of that with Tekken is we have what's called the dojo system. It's a way by which community organizers can have their events participate against our official circuitry points and get the players that play in their local communities to be ranked upon our official ladders. And then we have that application process open to anyone, anywhere who's willing to put together a tournament. And you can be a part of the official event structures. And then your points allocation based on your dojo events are determined by the number of people from your community that end up participating. The harder your tournament is, the more people that entered, the more points that you get out of it. So it's really a testament to inclusivity in that regard. And we've seen in the past several years working with that format, a really large rise of diversity in our top players. A really great example from this, a very highly noticed example of this was last year, Arslanash from Pakistan won Evo and like as a central part of the Tekken World Tour. And yeah, it really like brings more people into the space. And then to, I think, Ariana's point, when you have more of those people who you can look up to within the space, professional players or commentators on camera that you can identify with, it can inspire more people to want to go out and get involved. And as a result, we've seen a large surge of tournaments and like other highly competitive players now developing in that area. And as a result, it just inspires us more to bring our tournaments further afield, see where else we can find new budding stars, highly motivated players, and really strong communities. I will say as well, another kind of interesting point is diversity on camera. What we like to focus on and what we've been focusing on recently with, obviously this year we had to shift to online events, but we've been doing online events throughout the world. Right now, actually, we're live in the Philippines with the Tekken Online Challenge. And we really always are focusing on promoting local talent, working with commentators who both not only know their communities directly, but are representative of their communities directly. Making sure that we're like working with people who are local and keeping, obviously like merit comes first and capabilities come first, but working with diversity however we can to promote a more inclusive space is really top of mind for us whenever we're preparing for a new event and setting up in a new region. So those are kind of the fundamentals about how we go about it. We've seen really great success with this when it comes to the results and the diversity from our players and our commentators and who is involved in our events, both from not just an ethnicity standpoint, but from a gender standpoint as well. We have really strong female ambassadors in the game, Cuddlecore being the primary example within Tekken, of course. She's been fantastic and is continually on the path to success. Yeah, it's honestly really gratifying to see. And my note from a design standpoint and from a circuitry standpoint, publishers obviously are very often involved in the design of their pro events and circuitry, focusing on having events that are not structured just around the market basis of where your titles are is a really, really good starting point for making sure that everybody has an opportunity to see someone like themselves playing on the biggest stages. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, representation is super important. Joe and I actually had a couple of meetings with some female esports pro players that have been inspiring. And when they talk about their stories of how little girls will come up to them after a match and go, wow, I just didn't even know this is a thing I could do. Like you hear that as a person of color, a minority, especially, you have a moment of like, wow, yeah, I know what that feels like and how powerful that is and how important that is to give to the next generation to, slowly shift this thing back into a good direction. So with that, thank you, Liam. So we're going to shift over into the next part. I'm basically going to give each of our panelists one question. They'll have around 3 to 4 minutes to answer it. And we're going to start with John Festinger. Question for you is, as organizations engage in improving their diversity and inclusion efforts, are there any best practices that you've seen implemented anywhere?
Well, to me, I guess with my background in the NHL and the Vancouver Canucks, I think it's important to be aspirational in terms of best practices. So when I look at sports, I look at the NBA as the gold standard on almost all governance practices under the current commissioner. I think almost by any metric. But when we're talking about equality, about non-discrimination, about promoting diversity. Obviously the NBA and the work it did to create the WNBA is very significant. And no other league has done that. I'll also remind everybody that the NBA was really the first in a serious way, involving ownership, its then current ownership structures, in creating esports leagues. So there's kind of, you see a pattern here. But I want to emphasize the last part of it, because I think this is kind of, in a way, the most aspirational, but also the most important, and also the thing that fits most naturally with many, not all, university cultures. And that is that the NBA, and you could see it especially around the playoffs this year, especially around Black Lives Matters, that activism was actively encouraged, was very much part of the game in the best possible way, that it went directly into marketing, but again, positive social marketing. The jerseys were cool. Everything about it, to me, others may differ, was done right, was done classy, but it was very much activism. And it very much made a statement. And it will be for the historians to tell us the impact it had on the US elections or not. But however you look at it, it was a very positive experience. It was well led and by the commissioner and by the players. And so I think when we look at esports, when we look at university esports, that leadership by players, that sense of activism, looking for equality. I look at my fellow panelists and the things they've called for, especially the women on the panel and their experiences. I think that's incredibly valuable. And I don't think that we should have quiet voices. I think we should have loud voices going forward. And I think we should use the NBA model, since it's by far the most successful model in sports, as the model that esports aspires to. And I'll stop there.
No, great answer. I think we've seen that, comparatively speaking, especially to your point, John, and the Black Lives Matter movement, and how the different leagues and organizations responded in terms of their fan base being supporting it, as well as the players and the coaches and the owners. It was top to bottom, like world class in terms of how they approached the issue. I'm going to turn that. The next question is for Nessa Harrison, and now that I've heard your description of your organization, this is even more, important question for you. What would you say are the keys to having the healthy and successful college esports organization that you all have? Because it is bracing. I know, again, growing up in America, when you have that bubble and grow up in that cocoon, and then suddenly you're let out like, oh, the world is cold and, and no one cares. And also some of them are awful. That's the shock to your system. But how do we still make that cocoon work for the students when they're on campus or involved with us?
Sure. I'd say that for our club, one of the most important things is having a strong leadership that's welcoming of everyone on campus, regardless of what they look like. I'd say that one of the strongest parts of our club is actually our HR department, and having zero tolerance, as I mentioned earlier, for any sort of discriminatory behavior. Like they've tried doing things like putting together sexual harassment workshops just to educate our community on how to appropriately handle some situations, even as a bystander. I feel like that's actually something that our administration could help us with as well. Other things would be like hosting career events to show that women and minorities have a place in esports beyond just the collegiate esports clubs, the way that I found out about it. I'd say, like Jim mentioned, one of the most important things is speaking up and using our voices. That's something that has been incredibly valuable to our club, and that is holding each other accountable. You can't just let people like say whatever they want, whether it's like racist or sexist, and deter that from being an inclusive community on campus. I'd say that that's something that like every club can work on. As I mentioned earlier, your club is a home for students everywhere, so you should try to make that as inclusive as possible, and again, hold each other accountable for any sort of mistakes they might make, and like teach them and be an educational resource for students who want to get more involved in esports. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. You all couldn't see me while she was talking, but I'm jotting down the notes of, oh, HR department, that's a very good idea. So very insightful, really good tidbits. We might be following up to get more detail on how do we make sure we can model our organization to have that type of culture throughout. So next question is for Cathy Guh. Question for you from our crosstown rivals, UCLA. What have been the more successful efforts you all have done in your organization to improve equity and inclusion?
So I think that we have a lot of similarities with Nessa's org in the sense that we truly do try to put our minorities and marginalized groups in a spot where they feel comfortable speaking out and being themselves. The ways we do this is by having mandatory workshops for all our staff and players with UCLA professionals. So we brought in nutritionists, physical therapists, sexual harassment and discrimination trainers, all like professionals from UCLA. So we try to make use of our resources as a club sport at UCLA. What we've done is hire a very large amount of female staff. Approximately half of all our board members are women, and actually 4 out of 7 of this year's intern class are women, including if we count all of our graphic designers and stuff, I'd say we have a majority of women on our staff actually, which is pretty unique for an esports organization for sure. When we're back on campus, we plan to start a women in gaming initiative, and we use our esports training center as a hub for that. Besides that, we have an anonymous report form that we use to make sure that even if students may not feel comfortable speaking to us directly out of fear of retaliation, privacy, we have ways that they can communicate with us no matter what.
Those are great. Thank you so much. Again, taking great notes from all the awesome work you all are doing in the space. So my next question is for Ariana Yo. What do you think universities can do better in engaging with underrepresented groups within esports?
All right. So from my point of view, currently, the Singapore varsity scene is not very supportive. So I think number one would be getting more support for esports events. For example, as Sean said in the earlier panel, our sort of rival university would be NUS, but NUS esports, they are varsity society, so they have more support, and like he said, their teams train regularly as compared to ours. We are struggling to get varsity status for our club, so our club is quite unknown, and every time we want to host an event, we will have to email the school, and it's hard for us to get funding. As a result, we can't really host a lot of events. And one example of the university level, we had a Valorant inter-university competition recently. However, you can see the differences in the university's emphasis on esports, because NUS teams, they have been training for like weeks already, and we only sent in one NTU team, and the NTU team formed like the night before the competition. So yeah, and like the reason why is because we're always emphasizing on our academics, and a lot of the players say, because we don't have support from the university, so they think that it's not something we should prioritize over our studies. So because of this, we don't really have sponsorship for esports teams or events, and I think that doing that would be a great step in encouraging people to pursue it as a career. Because if your university doesn't even see it as viable enough to support you, why would you want to take it up by yourself? Yeah, and esports in our society is always seen as lower than sports. We don't have the same visibility, the same promotion. So sports usually there are large scale events, the university will support them. And for esports, we kind of have to do our own promotion, and it's a very small community because we don't have a large outreach. People don't take our CCA seriously. For example, I'm from business. I'm specializing in banking and finance. And I had a friend once tell me, "Oh, you have to join an academic CCA in order to boost your portfolio. You shouldn't join like esports because it's not going to help you in the future." Yeah. So stuff like this, it really deters people from even thinking of joining our CCA because they feel like, oh, university is important to choose something related to what you want to do in the future. And if you join like a game CCA, that is just a waste of time. So like a lot of this mindset, the university can really help to change that by actually supporting us and change their mindset towards esports. Maybe offer esports or game related modules that students can take to educate them on it. Like it actually is viable, and the university will support you. And females can actually make it in the scene, stuff like that. Like our CCA, we don't even have our own gaming venue. We don't have any equipment from the school. All of it we have to pay for it with our own club funds, and like we have to get sponsorship from other organizations when we want to host events with prizes. So I think like this lack of support really deters anybody from thinking of it as a viable career. But I also feel that uh, education institutions before university, like junior college or secondary school, should start opening up to the idea of having esports as a CCA that you can join, like a activity that you can join. Because now a lot of people, when they join sports earlier before university, when they go into university, they want to carry on the same sports. But because it's not even heard of in junior college or polytechnic levels, people don't really when they go into uni, they don't even consider it because they want to join something that they've been in before. And because of this lack of continuity, many people never really expose themselves to esports from a younger age, and as a result they don't think that is actually an option to consider. Yeah.
Totally. No, I think you're dealing, it sounds like, with not just school issues at the university level, but also the cultural issues you talked about earlier, where it's just seen and it's looked down on as a waste of time as gaming. And honestly, in the States, gaming was seen as that, I'd say, up until maybe around 10, 15 years ago. And by some segments, they would still make that argument. But it's gotten a lot more professionalized, and people understand the size of the business is what's giving it respect here. And so I think, but we still have a long way to go. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Coach Joe Jacko. Question for him is, what have been the biggest differences between your role in coaching at USC and coaching an all-female team at Westridge?
Yeah. Honestly, there aren't like too many large differences. I would say at the level at which I would say the only one I can think of might be the level at which they compete. The players at USC have been playing individually for years, whereas the players at Westridge have only begun playing the game close to 6 months ago, last spring. So for Westridge specifically, the focus on the game is much less on the high level macro and meta of the game, and it's rather focused on developing a strong foundation and understanding of the game. Telling the experience to the students, it largely stays the same. A lot of what I'm focusing on at Westridge, again, is more conductive to an academic style. They thrive in an environment, honestly, where they can take notes and learn learn within their extracurriculars, similar to the classes that they're in. Honestly, the one thing about coaching that transcends both the high school and the collegiate level is that I get to see firsthand the growth of the student players. And I think that that goes far beyond any sort of single metric that I could judge between the high school to collegiate. What's important here is that we focus on creating a pipeline that leads students from high school to the collegiate level to the professional scene. I don't think we're anywhere near that, even in the US. I think that when we can focus on introducing esports at a young age, and again, like I talked about in the previous part of the panel, is if we can start at a young age dealing with the communication, the gender and communication aspects that influence the way in which students communicate online and offline, is kind of how we can start tackling that issue. And then we'll build out that pipeline to the collegiate level and further into the professional level. Similar to any traditional sport, there's a sense of team camaraderie that I get to experience playing with the girls at Westridge. And there's a camaraderie aspect that's amplified by this sort of separation. They share photos of themselves and what they're doing, what they've done in the past. They share, learn, laugh together. And I think that drastically influences how they are able to communicate as a team. And I think that every single day when I get to coach on Tuesdays and Thursdays, those are my favorite days of the week. I know everyone is used to the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, but I think that when I get to experience playing with the student players and in their atmosphere, this environment that they've developed for themselves, that's where I'm happiest. And that's what makes my job special, is that normal weekdays become extra special when I get to play and experience the game with them and cheer them on every day of the week. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
You would think after teaching for the last almost year, I would know to turn the mute button off. Final question is for Liam Slack. So Liam, question is, do you feel like the level of inclusiveness and its importance to a gamer's culture, the players that play the game or the viewers of the game when it comes to streaming, do they vary by genre or title?
Yeah, good question, Jim. Thanks. Yeah, I think it does. There's a lot of different ways and factors that can affect that, right? I think from a obvious standpoint, like on a title by title basis, there are games that have characters that are more diverse and representative. And this isn't from this is more of a game development standpoint than an esports standpoint, right? I can use Tekken as an example where we introduce new characters from different cultures and regions of the world, and that can help inspire and like bring more diverse communities and interest them in playing characters that are from their area that fight with their styles and things like that. But there's other great examples of games that have been doing this as well. Rainbow Six Siege has like different operators from countries all around the world, and it's a great way of inspiring diversity for inclusion in players. I think as well, genre-wise, it can have an effect. We obviously work primarily esports-wise with fighting games, which are 1v1 titles, like head-to-head. And as some of our female colleagues on the panel here had mentioned, that turning on their mics when it comes to team play and like competitive-based games that require team environment and focus to win, that can be an intimidating step to overcome. So just that natural barrier can obviously create more narrow like diversity within any given title. And there's also the note that with team-based play comes natural societal, not natural, it shouldn't be natural, but societal references where, you know, you are someone who's like in a team and you want to surround yourselves with like-minded individuals, and in trying to do so, you pick people that are the same gender as you or are the same race as you, and like that's then slowly forms into a largely non-diverse section, right? So with team-based games and large team-based organizations that enter the space, really focusing on making sure that there's diversity within your ranks and that there's opportunity for a diverse set of players is a really big challenge, because you want to get everybody on the same page, and the more like different your players are, the harder it can be to bring that coordination together sometimes, or at least it can be perceived that way. So I think that's one of the largest things to try and wrestle with from a team-based play professional esports standpoint. And it's an interesting challenge that right now we don't have the circuitry to take on. We all have 1v1 titles, but it's something I'd love to explore in the future.
Totally. No, thank you. Great answer. Yeah, clearly there are a lot of challenges here. This next section is going to be around 10 minutes, I believe. Yeah, I think we're still good on time. Basically, I'm going to be reading questions from the audience, and for the panelists, just jump in. Don't be shy about jumping in and just starting to answer. And if anybody wants to add to that answer, go for it. The first one looks like the most upvoted was from Matthew. His question/statement is, it's interesting that esports brings people together, and yet there is an ugliness that can come out with cyberbullying, sexism, etc. How or who can police that?
I can jump in first from a publisher standpoint, of course. Again, I'm on the esports side, so largely when it comes to regulation of discriminatory behavior, cyberbullying, or generally, foul conduct breaking behavior. Like I'm focused on the esports front, but regulation within titles has come a long way when it comes to publisher standpoints and automation of and then detection of issues along those lines. And I think controlling for that within spaces within the games, obviously like chat censors and retroactive banning is something that's been improved a lot in recent years. Now I think one of the next steps for that is for other media discourse locations, Discord, your other social medias of the world, having a tighter realm on like an ability to like police those spaces from their standpoints, because it requires the owner of the product to really be taking comprehensive action against and defenses for the people that need it, those kinds of spaces. And I think I saw John raising his hand, so I'll throw to him.
Yep, go for it.
Well, I'll just very quickly go back to my one of my initial answers, which is good governance structures. And good governance structures will encourage and give permission for clear and decisive action to be taken when discriminatory events happen. And I'll tie in my NBA example and the example of what happened to Donald Sterling and how unequivocal the NBA was in dealing with that, and how that in fact set the NBA up for success in the past couple of years in a very big way, and created a large separation between them and the other leagues. I mean, woe unto Major League Baseball, for example, which has been, just a governance disaster in more ways than can be imagined. So I think it's very important that esports get on this train if esports is going to actually live up to its incredible potential.
Totally agree. And that was what, oh, go ahead, please.
Yeah, okay. So I think that is actually everybody, the whole community's job to police that. Like, for example, if you're just playing a game and you see someone being harassed, you should actually try and stand up for that person, because it feels very good to have support from someone who is not in the same community as you, but like fights for your rights. Like, for example, I remember back in 2014, I was playing a Counter-Strike game and I had a team of pups. So I didn't know them. And I remember I used my mic to give a call out. And immediately after that, someone started harassing me, like, oh, are you a girl? And then started like flirting. And then after that, I felt really bad. I remember the humiliation. And then I didn't want to use my mic for the rest of the game. But then I had a teammate who immediately turned on his mic, and then he was like, hey man, stop that. Like, just because she's a girl doesn't mean that she shouldn't be playing the game. And then he addressed me, and then he was like, it's okay, use your mic, we won't say anything about it. And that really made an impact on me, and I still remember it, because to have someone stand up for you, even though they don't go through what you're going through, it shows that there is support for you in the community, and not everybody will judge you and stuff. And like, for example, in my club, we're not very tolerant of these kind of racism or sexist remarks. We always shoot them down. Like, for example, when we have a Twitch stream and then people start like saying derogatory comments, we would warn them like, this is a safe place. You shouldn't be attacking anyone, and we won't stand for it. And then people who continue to harass, we will block them from our Twitch stream. Even though it means losing a few streamers, it doesn't matter, because our gamers should feel comfortable playing games, no matter who they are or where they come from. Yeah, so it's really everyone's job as a community to stop these cyber bullies and stuff, to make people feel more welcome to join the community.
Absolutely. And I think that I just got the heads up that we should wrap it up. So that was our one question from the audience. Sorry, everyone. I think there is a way that someone will follow up, but I appreciate them all. They're all really solid questions, and we might be able to find some way to communicate the answers back to you, or at least give you feedback. So thank you so much to our panelists. That was extremely enlightening. What's interesting is that everyone kind of approached the same challenge that we have at the center of esports, whether it's from the collegiate level, professional level, academic, et cetera, from publisher level. The challenge that we all have is to figure out how do we deal with this problem before it becomes part of our system permanently, and it becomes even harder to take on or remove because we've let it fester for so long. And it seems like the one common thread from all these answers and all the feedback that we've been talking about and how to address this is focusing on the areas that you can control and making sure that you overcorrect and make absolutely sure that your organization is open to anyone and everyone to participate in. The more open we can make sure we can make these organizations, and the more we can inject that thinking and that perspective to a younger gamer and younger consumers over time, that's going to make this ecosystem healthier and make esports stronger for years to come. Thanks so much. Have a great evening. I'll turn it back over to APRU.
Thank you so much, Mr. Huntley, and our panelists. Once again today, thank you so much for all of our speakers who've participated for an engaging and influential discussion on the strategies to cultivate Hong Kong as a hub for esports, and also ways to build inclusive and diverse communities in the Asia Pacific. Please note that at 1 p.m. we will also be featuring the Borregos Invitational Tournament. I highly encourage you to tune in and also find out who the winner is. To find out more details about APRU, please feel free to visit their website at www.apru.org. Last but not least, please don't forget to share your experience at the Metagames conference today, and also tag us at #Delve2020 and at APRU1997. Thank you so much, everybody, and I wish you a lovely weekend ahead.